Between 1945 and 1947, more than 375,000 German prisoners of war remained detained in camps spread across the continental United States. As part of the denazification and reintegration strategy, the U.S. War Department authorized experimental programs allowing supervised visits to nearby cities, especially for prisoners deemed low risk. Among these prisoners were hundreds of women who had served in auxiliary and military roles for the Reich. The barbed wire gates opened one June morning, and Anna Schaefer braced herself for the violence that never came. She crossed the threshold of the prison camp in Illinois, carrying only the fear of being torn apart by American hands, of being spat on in the streets, of paying for the sins of a defeated nation. What she found on the other side was a quiet avenue, children riding bicycles and the impossible scent of fresh bread escaping from a corner bakery. This is the story of German women prisoners of war who couldn't believe the Americans were letting them walk freely through the cities, and how this supervised freedom destroyed everything they had been taught about the enemy. The world was not ready to witness the surrender of certainty. Anna Schaefer stepped onto American soil with trembling hands in the pockets of the worn-out gray uniform she'd been wearing for 3 months. She was 24, with blonde hair cut short at the nape of her neck, and a thin scar above her left eyebrow, a reminder of shrapnel from a bombing in Munich. She had been a nurse in a military hospital until the final collapse, until the Allied tanks broke through the last defenses, and she was captured along with dozens of other women who had served the German war effort. During the Atlantic crossing, in the fetid holds of a transport ship, Anna imagined 1,000 ways of dying on enemy soil. None of them involved the smell of coffee now filling her nostrils as Captain John Miller explained the rules of the supervised walk through Bloomington. The captain was a tall man with broad shoulders, blue eyes full of suspicion, and a firm voice that allowed no questioning. He spoke in slow English while Eleanor Briggs, a middle-aged woman with gray hair tied in a neat bun, translated into German with a heavy but understandable accent. Anna listened to the words without fully processing their meaning. You will walk along the main street. You may enter businesses under supervision. You cannot stray from the group. Any attempt to escape will be treated as a violation of the Geneva Conventions. Marta Keller, next to her, spat on the dirt ground and muttered something about American propaganda, about psychological traps meant to break their resistance. Anna didn't answer, because she didn't know whether Marta was right or simply too afraid to find out she was wrong. When the gate of the camp opened completely, Anna expected to hear shouts, insults in English spat with hate, stones flying toward the group of 12 German women. What she heard was only the creaking of metal hinges and the distant song of a bird she didn't recognize, a sharp and repetitive sound echoing among the trees lining the road. Sergeant Thomas Walsh walked ahead of the group with his rifle slung over his shoulder, but his fingers didn't touch the weapon, and his eyes scanned the street with an expression closer to boredom than vigilance. Anna took the first step out of the camp and felt the rough texture of the cracked asphalt under her boots, so different from the mud and broken concrete she had walked on for the past few years. The air tasted of impossible normality, of civilian life she had forgotten how to breathe. Bloomington's main street unfolded before them like a propaganda painting Anna had always believed to be fake. White and light blue wooden houses, gardens with yellow and red flowers, cars parked in neat rows with not a single broken window or bullet-riddled wall. A woman swept the sidewalk in front of a grocery store and nodded as the group passed, a neutral gesture but devoid of hostility. Anna felt her legs weaken, and Marta gripped her arm with excessive force, her nails digging through the thin sleeve. Eleanor Briggs pointed to a bakery across the street and explained they could go in, that they could even buy something if they had the vouchers they'd received in the camp. Anna looked at the crumpled paper in her hand, printed with the American flag and a value in cents, and couldn't associate it with real money or anything that made sense in her fragmented mental universe. When they entered the bakery, the jingling of the doorbell sounded like an accusation or a blessing. Anna couldn't tell. The baker was a stocky man in a white apron stained with flour, who looked up from the counter and smiled naturally, before realizing who these women were. His expression faltered for a moment, somewhere between surprise and discomfort. But then he nodded and said something in English that Eleanor translated as, "Welcome." Anna smelled the warm bread mixed with cinnamon and sugar, a fragrance so familiar yet so alien that her eyes burned with unshed tears. Marta Keller stepped back until she was pressed against the door, breathing through her mouth as if the air inside the bakery were poisonous. And Anna understood perfectly why the world they had been promised to hate was offering fresh bread on a summer Sunday. 3 weeks after the first walk, Anna Schaefer began to count the days not by the marks on the tent wall, but by the smells she brought back to the prison camp. Saturday meant the sweet scent of vanilla ice cream that a shop near the Methodist church served in waxed paper cups. Sunday brought the perfume of fresh flowers that Eleanor Briggs picked from her garden and left on the community room table where they had basic English lessons. On the 4th visit to the city, Captain Miller allowed the group to enter a pharmacy, and Anna froze in front of a shelf full of soaps wrapped in colorful paper, each labeled with impossible fragrances: rose, lavender, lemon, peppermint. She held a lavender soap between her fingers, feeling the smooth, waxy texture of the packaging, and remembered her mother saving tiny pieces of soap in Berlin because there was nothing left to wash the body or clothes. Marta Keller was beside her, staring at the same products with an expression of pure rage, as if the abundance were a personal provocation. Eleanor Briggs appeared beside them with a kind smile that Anna had started to recognize as genuine, not strategic. The American woman explained in hesitant German that each prisoner could choose one item from the pharmacy using the work vouchers they received for helping maintain the camp. Anna pressed the lavender soap against her chest and felt something inside her break, like thin ice under too much weight. Sergeant Walsh stood in the doorway, arms crossed, but his eyes no longer held the hard, metallic sharpness of the first days. There was something like curiosity or maybe pity. Anna hated being the object of pity, but at the same time, she couldn't deny that she needed that crumb of humanity, that stupid soap that cost 15 cents and represented an entire universe she had lost the right to inhabit. That night, Anna washed her face and arms with the lavender soap using the cold water from the community tap. The foam was a nearly translucent white, and the fragrance filled the wooden tent where 12 women slept on narrow bunk beds. Some complained about the strong smell, others remained silent, but Anna noticed they were all inhaling deeply, absorbing that small lie of normality. Marta Keller turned over in her bed and stared at the wooden plank wall without saying a word, but Anna saw her shoulders trembling and knew she was crying silently. In the space between sleep and wakefulness, Anna tried to reconcile the image of the cruel enemy she had been taught to hate with the reality of a country that allowed war prisoners to choose scented soaps in pharmacies in small towns. The equation didn't add up, and that frightened her more than any physical punishment. Captain Miller gathered the group the next morning to announce a change in the visit program. They would now be allowed to attend Sunday services at the local Baptist church, as long as they stayed in the last row of pews and left immediately after the service ended. Anna looked at Eleanor Briggs, expecting to see triumph or moral superiority, but found only quiet fatigue in the older woman's eyes. The community leader explained that there was resistance among some locals, that 3 families had protested the presence of German women in the church, but that the reverend insisted that all the children of God deserved a place in the house of the Lord. Anna hadn't believed in God since she saw a hospital full of wounded children bombed in Munich. But she accepted the invitation because the alternative was spending another Sunday inside the camp, staring at the barbed wire and thinking of everything she had lost. The inside of the Baptist church smelled of candle wax and old wood. Anna sat in the last pew next to Marta and 6 other German women, all wearing civilian clothes donated by the American Red Cross, gray skirts and white blouses that looked like doll clothes on adult bodies. The choir began singing a hymn Anna didn't know, female and male voices intertwined in a harmony that made her throat tighten. She watched the American families in the rows ahead, restless children poking their parents, men in suits holding hymnals with worn covers, women wearing hats adorned with artificial flowers. No one turned to stare at them with hate. No one spat insults or demanded they be thrown out. And Anna realized that this polite indifference was more devastating than any violence because it forced her to confront the possibility that she had never been important enough to deserve absolute hate. Anna Schaefer began dreaming in English in the 6th week of imprisonment in the United States. They were fragmented dreams where she bought bread in a bakery and thanked in perfect English, where she talked to Eleanor Briggs about the weather and the corn harvest as if she were a local. She woke up sweating and ashamed, feeling like she had betrayed something fundamental, but not being able to name exactly what. Marta Keller stopped talking to her after Anna accepted Eleanor's invitation to help at the public library 2 afternoons a week. Organizing books and cleaning shelves under Sergeant Walsh's constant supervision, Marta's ideological resistance had become increasingly rigid, an armor against the reality that was creeping in through the cracks of the prison camp. But Anna found she no longer had the energy to maintain that internal war. The Bloomington Library was a red brick building with tall windows and a front garden where blue and white hydrangeas grew. On the first afternoon of work, Anna held the cold brass doorknob of the front door and hesitated before turning it, as if crossing that threshold meant definitively abandoning some version of herself that had existed before defeat. The interior smelled of old paper and sundust, a scent that instantly transported her back to the library at the university in Berlin, where she had studied nursing before the war consumed all her civilian aspirations. Eleanor Briggs handed her a blue apron and pointed to the children's bookshelves that needed to be reorganized alphabetically. Anna touched the colorful spines, her fingers sliding over illustrations of rabbits and bears and smiling children, and felt a sudden dizziness as she realized that the world had continued to exist and produce happy stories while she had been crumbling in Europe. Sergeant Walsh sat in a chair by the window with a newspaper open, but his eyes often drifted toward Anna, not with suspicion, but with something close to genuine curiosity. He had started greeting her in basic German, words mispronounced that Eleanor had taught him, and Anna surprised herself by responding with short sentences in English that she had learned in the community room lessons. There was an absurd strangeness in this dance of civility, as if they were both playing roles in a play whose script had been written by people who forgot to include the mandatory hatred between victors and vanquished. One afternoon, Walsh offered her a piece of mint gum, and Anna accepted without thinking, chewing the artificial, sweet taste as she organized recipe books in the cooking section. When she realized what she had done, it was too late to refuse or give it back, and the small intimacy of that gesture haunted her for days. Eleanor Briggs brought 3 women from the community to meet Anna on a cloudy Thursday. They were wives of local farmers, women with calloused hands and sunburned faces, who examined Anna with a mixture of curiosity and caution. One of them, Mrs. Patterson, asked in slow English if Anna knew how to cook traditional German dishes. Eleanor translated, and Anna answered yes, that her grandmother had taught her how to make Sauerbraten and Apfelstrudel before the shortages made it impossible to find the necessary ingredients. Mrs. Patterson smiled and said something about swapping recipes, about maybe organizing a cooking afternoon where the German women could teach traditional dishes in exchange for learning American recipes. Anna nodded mechanically, but inside there was a tumult of contradictory emotions: gratitude, shame, confusion, and a diffuse anger she couldn't direct at any specific target. That night, back at the camp, Marta Keller confronted Anna in the tent in front of the other women. She accused her of collaboration, of betraying the memory of the dead Germans, of selling herself for crumbs of American comfort. Anna listened in silence until something inside her snapped and she shouted back, harsh words about Marta not understanding that the war was over, that resisting was just prolonging suffering without purpose. The other women watched the argument with scared eyes, and no one took sides because they all carried the same internal conflict, the same dissonance between what they had been taught and what they experienced every day. Captain Miller appeared at the tent door, drawn by the noise, and ordered silence with a firm but not cruel voice, and Anna realized that even American discipline was different from the brutality she had known in the years of war. She lay down on the narrow bed with the lavender soap hidden under the thin pillow, and cried silently until dawn. September arrived in Bloomington with golden afternoons and cool nights that smelled of dry leaves and wood smoke. Anna Schaefer received her first real payment in US dollars, not camp vouchers but actual money for 6 weeks of work at the library. It was only $12, but Eleanor Briggs explained that she could spend it however she wanted in the city, with no restrictions beyond the general rules of supervision. Anna held the green bills between her fingers, feeling the peculiar texture of American paper money, rougher than the Reichsmark she had used in Germany, and had the strange sensation of holding pieces of a possible future. Marta Keller had refused to participate in the work program and stayed in the camp most of the time, writing letters to family in occupied Germany and reading books in German that the Red Cross sent monthly. The distance between them had become an impassable abyss. Captain Miller organized a special outing to the local cinema on a Saturday afternoon. 10 German women, including Anna, walked down the main street escorted by Walsh and 2 other soldiers, all with rifles but none with their weapons in a combat-ready position. The cinema was an Art Deco building with bright neon signs and a worn red carpet that smelled of buttery popcorn and caramelized sugar. Anna had never imagined that one day she would watch an American movie in an American cinema as a prisoner of war. But there she was, buying a ticket for $2 and receiving change in coins that jingled in the palm of her hand. The movie was a musical comedy with Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, fast-paced dialogue that Anna didn't fully understand, but dance numbers that hypnotized her with their pure elegance and frivolity. Sitting in the dark between other German women and American citizens who were buying popcorn and laughing at the jokes, Anna felt the last of her internal resistance dissolve like salt in water. Eleanor Briggs organized the promised cooking afternoon in a community hall next to the Baptist church. 5 German women and 8 Americans gathered around industrial stoves and long wooden tables covered with checkered cloths. Anna taught Mrs. Patterson and 2 other women how to prepare Kartoffelpuffer, potato pancakes that her mother used to make on Sundays before the war. Her hands moved with muscle memory as she grated potatoes and mixed eggs and flour, and the smell of fried onions brought such an intense wave of nostalgia that she had to stop and take a deep breath to avoid collapsing. Mrs. Patterson gently touched her shoulder and offered her a glass of cold lemonade, and Anna accepted with a shaky smile that was half gratitude, half despair. The American women taught apple pie and fried chicken recipes, and for 3 hours, the community hall became a suspended space where nationalities mattered less than the right texture of dough or the ideal seasoning for a sauce. Sergeant Walsh appeared at the end of the afternoon to escort the German women back to the camp. He tried a Kartoffelpuffer and gave a thumbs-up gesture, and Anna laughed for the first time in months, a short and involuntary laugh that surprised her with its spontaneity. Eleanor Briggs hugged each of the German women goodbye, a physical gesture that violated all the barriers between prisoner and guard, but was not contested by anyone. Anna felt Eleanor's thin arms around her shoulders and the soft scent of talc and lavender that the woman wore. And for a moment, she allowed herself to imagine she had an American mother, an alternative life where there had never been war or impossible choices. When they parted, Eleanor held Anna's face with both hands and said in imperfect German, "You have a future. Anna, don't let the past steal it from you." The words pierced something fundamental, and Anna nodded without being able to speak. Back at the camp under the reddish sky of sunset, Anna found Marta Keller sitting alone in the dirt yard, staring at the barbed wire. She sat next to her without asking for permission, and they remained silent for long minutes. Finally, Marta spoke in a hoarse voice, "I don't know how to stop hating them." Anna placed her hand over Marta's and replied, "I don't either, but I'm starting to hate less the fact that I don't hate them." Marta laughed, a bitter and broken sound, and Anna realized they were both crying, not caring who saw. Captain Miller was watching from a distance, leaning against one of the watchtowers, and when his eyes met Anna's, he nodded briefly, a silent acknowledgement that everyone there was navigating in morally unfamiliar territory. The war had ended on the battlefields months earlier, but the real surrender was happening right there, in that prisoner camp in the heart of America. A capitulation not of weapons, but of certainties that no longer served to explain the world. October brought impossible colors to the trees around Bloomington, reds and golds that Anna Schaefer had never seen in Germany with such vibrant intensity. Eleanor Briggs explained that they were maples, the typical trees of the region. and that American autumn was famous for the chromatic explosion that transformed entire landscapes into natural tapestries. Anna listened to these explanations as though learning about an alien planet, absorbing information about seasons and geography, while trying to rebuild a sense of place in the world. Captain Miller authorized longer walks around the city, now including visits to the municipal park, where American families had picnics on Sundays, and children ran after red rubber balls. Sergeant Walsh walked a few meters behind the group of German women, but his presence had become almost decorative, a necessary formality that no one took seriously anymore. Marta Keller had started joining the walks after weeks of refusal, and Anna saw in her friend's eyes the same confusion she recognized in herself, that inability to keep hating when faced daily with simple gestures of humanity. On the first Wednesday of the month, Eleanor organized a visit to her sister-in-law's beauty salon, a small establishment with 3 red leather chairs and mirrors framed in faded gold. The owner, a blonde woman in her 40s named Dorothy, greeted the German women with a professional smile that didn't completely hide the tension in her shoulders. Eleanor explained that Dorothy had offered free haircuts for the prisoners, a gesture of Christian charity supported by the Baptist community, but still generating uncomfortable murmurs among some locals. Anna sat in the leather chair and watched her reflection in the mirror, her blonde hair grown unevenly, the deep circles under her blue eyes that seemed to belong to someone else. Dorothy draped a striped cape over her shoulders and began combing her hair with smooth, professional movements, and Anna closed her eyes, feeling the comb's bristles slide through her scalp in a sensation so intimate and forgotten that her throat tightened. The salon smelled of sweet chemicals and hairspray, an artificial but comforting fragrance that evoked distant memories of her mother getting ready for social events in Berlin before the war consumed all vanity. Dorothy chatted in English while she worked, and Eleanor translated fragments about the weather, the pumpkin harvest, the Halloween dance that would be held in the high school gymnasium. Anna answered with monosyllables, but her mind processed the strangeness of the situation. A former nurse from the Reich being combed and cut by an American woman, as if they were just 2 women sharing an ordinary moment, and not representatives of nations that had massacred each other for years. When Dorothy finished and turned the chair so Anna could see the final result, she found in the hairdresser's eyes an expression that mixed professional pride with something close to compassion. Anna hesitantly thanked her in English, and Dorothy blinked quickly, looking away as though prolonged eye contact were dangerous. Marta sat in the next chair, and Anna saw her hands trembling as Dorothy draped the cape over her shoulders. Marta's ideological resistance had started to crack at the edges, small fissures widening every time someone offered them unsolicited kindness. When Dorothy asked through Eleanor how Marta wanted her cut, she replied in an almost inaudible voice that it didn't matter, that the American could do whatever she wanted. Dorothy frowned and said something firm in English that Eleanor translated, "It does matter. It's your hair, and you deserve to have an opinion about it." Anna saw Marta swallow hard and murmur that she just wanted the ends trimmed, and Dorothy nodded with satisfaction before starting to work. The sound of the scissors cutting hair filled the salon, a metallic and rhythmic noise that marked the time of a transformation deeper than aesthetics. When they left the beauty salon at the end of the afternoon, all 10 German women had clean, professionally cut hair, and Anna saw in the reflection of the shop windows something close to restored dignity. Sergeant Walsh made a comment that Eleanor translated as a compliment to their new appearances, and some women laughed with genuine shyness. They walked down the main street while the bell of the Baptist church rang at noon, 12 clear chimes echoing between the brick and wood buildings. Anna stopped in the middle of the sidewalk to listen to the sound completely, that American bell marking the time of a life she was starting to understand might one day be hers to inhabit. Marta briefly held her hand before letting it go, and in that quick gesture was a silent surrender, a recognition that both of them were being transformed by that small town and its obstinate offers of normality. The bell that announces noon does not distinguish between winners and losers. It only marks that time continues, indifferent to the wars men invent to interrupt it. November arrived with cold winds that tore the last leaves from the trees, leaving the bare branches silhouetted against increasingly low gray skies. Anna Schaefer had completed 3 months working at the library, and Eleanor Briggs announced that she would receive a symbolic raise, an additional $2 per week in recognition of her dedication and efficiency. Captain Miller authorized that the prisoners who participated in the work programs could visit the local cafeteria once a week, always under supervision, but allowed to sit at the counters and eat meals like regular customers. Anna entered the cafeteria on a Tuesday afternoon, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee hit her with physical force, a dark, bitter fragrance that evoked Sunday mornings in Munich, when the world still made sense. She sat at a swivel bench covered in cracked red vinyl, and Eleanor sat next to her, while Sergeant Walsh occupied a nearby table with a full view of the establishment. The waitress was a young woman, maybe 19, with brown hair tied in a ponytail and a white apron stained with coffee. She approached with a pad of paper and a carefully neutral expression, her eyes avoiding direct contact as she asked what they would like. Eleanor ordered coffee and toast, and Anna hesitantly repeated the same in English, savoring the foreign words in her mouth as if they were food. The waitress nodded and walked away quickly, and Anna noticed the tense way her shoulders moved, realizing the young woman was uncomfortable, but determined to do her job professionally. When the coffee arrived, steaming in a white cup with chipped edges, Anna held it with both hands, feeling the warmth seep into her cold fingers, and took the first sip with her eyes closed. The taste was strong and slightly bitter, with no sugar or milk because Anna had forgotten to ask, and it was perfect in its raw honesty. Marta Keller entered the cafeteria 15 minutes later, with 3 other German women, all wearing the Red Cross-donated coats that made them look like uniformed schoolgirls. Marta sat next to Anna and ordered hot chocolate, a choice that surprised Anna because it seemed deliberately childish, a regression to simpler comforts. When the drink arrived, crowned with melted marshmallows, Marta drank it in silence while watching the other customers through the reflection in the mirror behind the counter. There was an elderly couple eating apple pie at a corner table, 2 men in dirty overalls talking about cattle prices, and a woman alone reading the newspaper while smoking a long cigarette. No one paid too much attention to the Germans, and this indifference was both liberating and melancholic, as if they had become invisible or too irrelevant to deserve special attention. Eleanor received a phone call in the middle of the afternoon and had to leave to handle a family emergency, leaving Sergeant Walsh as the only supervisor. He moved to the bench next to Anna and ordered a slice of cherry pie, and for the first time in 3 months, they sat side by side without Eleanor's mediation or the rigid formalities of prisoner and guard. Walsh commented in simple English that winter would be harsh, that they would need heavier coats in the camp, and Anna replied that it had already snowed in Illinois. He seemed surprised that she knew the name of the state, and Anna explained that she had studied American geography in school before the war had turned all knowledge into propaganda or gray. Walsh sat in silence, chewing his pie slowly, then said something that Eleanor wasn't there to translate, but that Anna understood perfectly by his tone, that it was strange how people ended up sitting together eating pie when, months before, they would have been trying to kill each other on opposite battlefields. Anna finished her coffee and looked at the empty cup, feeling something close to betrayal, not against Germany or the dead, but against the version of herself that had existed before crossing the Atlantic. She wondered if her mother would recognize the woman drinking American coffee in small-town cafes and talking to enemy soldiers about the coming winter. Marta touched her arm and whispered in German that they needed to leave, that all of this was a psychological trap designed to break their resistance and turn them into collaborators. Anna turned to face her and replied firmly that maybe there was nothing left to resist except ghosts and memories that no longer served to navigate the present. Marta recoiled as if slapped, and Anna saw tears forming in her friend's eyes before she stood up and left the cafeteria with quick steps. Sergeant Walsh asked if everything was okay, and Anna nodded yes, but both of them knew it was a lie, that nothing was okay and maybe it never would be, that they were all navigating in moral territory, where there were no maps or reliable compasses. The coffee that is drunk at the enemy's tables always tastes of betrayal, but sometimes betrayal is simply the courage to choose life when everyone expects you to choose loyalty to the dead. December covered Bloomington with heavy snow, turning the city into a monochromatic watercolor of whites and grays. Anna Schaefer had completed 4 months of imprisonment in the United States and had begun using the word home to describe the wooden barrack where she slept, a linguistic slip that both frightened and comforted her at the same time. Captain Miller announced that some prisoners would be transferred to other camps at the beginning of the following year, part of a larger redistribution program designed to prepare for a potential repatriation to occupied Germany. The announcement fell over the camp like invisible snow, silent but transformative, and Anna realized that the idea of leaving Bloomington generated an anxiety in her that she couldn't fully name. Eleanor Briggs cried when she learned of the possible transfer of Anna, discreet tears that she quickly wiped away with a lace handkerchief, and offered to write a letter of recommendation in case Anna needed a job in post-war Germany. Anna accepted, knowing that this piece of American paper would be both valuable and compromising on German soil. The Baptist community organized a modest Christmas celebration that included the German prisoners for the first time. The community hall was decorated with pine garlands and colorful lights that blinked in irregular patterns, and there was a tree in the corner, adorned with ornaments made by the Sunday school children. Anna entered the heated hall and was enveloped by the smell of cinnamon and baked apples, and something inside her broke completely when she realized she was being included in an American Christian celebration as if she belonged to that community. Mrs. Patterson hugged her tightly and handed her a small package wrapped in red paper, and when Anna opened it, she found a pair of hand-knitted wool gloves in light blue. She held the gloves to her chest, unable to speak, and Mrs. Patterson said something in English that Eleanor translated. She had knitted them thinking of her daughter, who had died of pneumonia 3 years earlier, and would be happy to know that Anna would wear something made by her hands. Marta Keller stood in a corner of the hall, watching the festivities with a closed expression, but Anna saw that she accepted a cup of punch and a piece of spice cake when offered. Sergeant Walsh wore a ridiculous red sweater with embroidered reindeer and seemed genuinely embarrassed by the outfit, but the American children laughed at him with affection, and he reciprocated by making exaggerated faces. There was a surreal strangeness in the whole scene. German prisoners and American citizens singing Christmas carols in different languages, but with recognizable melodies, and Anna realized she was witnessing something that future historians would struggle to classify or explain. Captain Miller made a brief speech about peace and reconciliation, formal words that sounded sincere in his mouth, and then asked for a moment of silence for the dead on all sides. The silence that followed was dense and respectful, filled with invisible absences that inhabited that hall as much as the people present. Eleanor sat next to Anna by the Christmas tree and held her hand with a firm, maternal grip. She spoke in German about hope and reconstruction, about how the world would need people willing to forgive without forgetting, to remember without consuming themselves in bitterness. Anna listened to the words, recognizing the wisdom in them, but doubting her own ability to embody those abstract principles. She asked Eleanor if Americans truly believed it was possible to rebuild bridges with people who had supported a regime that caused so much suffering, and Eleanor replied that she didn't know if it was possible, but that the alternative was an eternal cycle of revenge and hate that would consume future generations. Anna thought of her mother and her younger sisters, who had stayed in a destroyed Berlin, and wondered what kind of Germany they would be trying to rebuild over the ruins, while she ate American cake in a heated hall on the other side of the Atlantic. When the party ended and they walked back to the camp under snow falling in thick, slow flakes, Anna felt the wool gloves in her pockets and the weight of the recommendation letter folded inside her blouse. Marta walked silently beside her until, just before the camp gate, she stopped and said that she wouldn't survive the transfer, that she would lose her sanity if she had to start everything over in another place with other guards and other rules. Anna held her friend's shoulders and promised that they would stay together, that she would find a way to ensure they wouldn't be separated. An impossible promise to fulfill, but a necessary one to make. Captain Miller held the gate open, watching them with an expression of deep fatigue, and when Anna passed by him, he murmured, Merry Christmas. Schaffer, in such poorly pronounced German that it almost sounded tender. Anna replied, Merry Christmas, Captain, in English, and saw genuine surprise in his eyes, as if he hadn't expected her to have absorbed so much of the language and culture he was trying to impose on them through strategic kindness. The gate closed behind them with a soft metallic sound, and Anna realized that the barbed wire no longer seemed like a prison but a border, a thin line between worlds that she had learned to inhabit simultaneously, without fully belonging to either. Promises made in the snow have the fragility of ice crystals, but sometimes fragility is the only form of truth left for people who have learned to survive in worlds that have collapsed beneath their feet.